Mirror Talk, special Undoing the Spell, language, fear, and the mechanics of brainwashing. Welcome back to Mirror Talk, and welcome to something a little different. This isn't another step in the usual sequence. This is a pause, a deep breath between layers, a one-off special that steps outside the familiar rhythm to address a question that's become impossible to ignore. A question that recently echoed across the digital noise like a nervous laugh at the edge of awareness. How do you tell someone they've been brainwashed? The question sounds simple, almost naive, until you try to answer it. Then you realize it's not a question about information. It's a question about perception. It's not about proof or persuasion. It's about physiology, emotion, and the invisible architecture of belief. You don't tell them. Because brainwashing doesn't live in logic. It lives in the body. That's where we're going today. This special episode brings together everything that lives under the broader umbrella of my work, the Inversiverse, the unfiltered human on the fringe, the body knows, the Linguaverse presents, Shadow Spectrum, and this series, Mirror Talk. Each project explores a facet of the same question. How does language shape reality, and how does the nervous system decide what that reality feels like? They're not separate worlds, they're concentric circles. The Inversiverse explores how perception is manipulated through systems, ideology, and illusion. The unfiltered human on the fringe dives into emotion, envy, shame, lust, and the raw human underbelly that institutions prefer we repress. The body knows translates philosophy into biology, how memory lives in muscle and trauma rewires the breath. The Linguaverse maps the evolution of language itself, how words become physiological signals, how tone regulates emotion faster than reason ever can. Shadow Spectrum takes those principles into the darker terrain, how suppressed energies, collective shadows, and occult archetypes play out through speech, story, and social systems. And Mirror Talk, this series, is where it all integrates, where the linguistic, the nervous, and the emotional converge into something you can actually feel changing in real time. That's what makes this one-off special, because the same mechanisms that heal can also be used to control. The same pathways that allow regulation can be hijacked to enforce obedience. And the same human need for belonging that allows love to flourish can be weaponized into fear. Setting the stage for the spell brainwashing isn't a science fiction concept. It isn't hypnosis, mind control, or black magic, at least not in the cinematic sense. It's psychology, physiology, and linguistics woven into an emotional ecosystem. When you understand the nervous system, the phenomenon becomes heartbreakingly clear. Brainwashing or indoctrination is essentially the manipulation of safety signals. It's the hijacking of the body's most sacred need, to belong, to be secure, to be seen as good. When fear becomes the currency of belonging, control is inevitable. Across history, every form of totalism, whether religious, political, or corporate, has relied on the same nervous system blueprint. 1. Disorient the individual. 2. Isolate them emotionally or socially. 3. Replace inner trust with external authority. 4. Reward conformity, punish questioning. The brain doesn't experience this as philosophy. It experiences it as survival. When the body perceives a threat, physical, emotional, or social, the autonomic nervous system activates in milliseconds. The amygdala fires, cortisol floods, and the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, discernment, and moral reasoning, partially shuts down. In this state, a human being becomes more suggestible, more compliant, more dependent on external cues to feel safe. That's the biology of obedience, emotional imprinting, and somatic memory. You can't rationalize someone out of indoctrination because they didn't rationalize themselves into it. They felt their way into it, often through fear, shame, or belonging. This is where emotional imprinting comes in, the way repeated emotional states carve grooves into the body's memory. If a person has been conditioned to associate safety with submission or love with obedience, that imprint becomes their baseline. Every attempt to challenge the belief system then feels like danger, not because the idea is wrong, but because the body interprets it as a threat. This is why arguments fail. This is why facts bounce off the traumatized. It's not ignorance, it's protection. The brain and body speak two dialects of the same human language, the rational, prefrontal, linguistic, and logical, and the emotional, somatic, autonomic, and ancestral. During fear activation, these two languages desynchronize. You can say you're safe in English, but the nervous system will only believe it in breath, tone, and gaze. That's why indoctrination doesn't just rely on ideas, it relies on rhythm, repetition, cadence, tone. Cults know this, governments know this, advertisers know this. They know that regulation is more persuasive than reason. You don't have to believe something if your body already feels safe agreeing with it. The mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, the architecture of indoctrination in the Linguaverse. I introduced what I call the mirror linguistic hypothesis, the idea that language doesn't just describe reality. It constructs it through mirrored neural and emotional resonance. Every word carries a vibration that triggers a physiological echo in both speaker and listener. When we hear certain words, our mirror neurons fire in ways that mimic the emotional state being communicated. In a healthy system, this process builds empathy, a shared regulation loop where emotion becomes mutual understanding. But in a manipulative system, this same mechanism is inverted. Empathy becomes entrainment. Instead of mirroring truth, the listener mirrors authority. Instead of co-regulation, we get codependence. The echo chamber becomes emotional architecture. That's how cults operate, not through reason, but through resonance. They create linguistic enclaves, small loops of meaning that feel safe because they are familiar. Phrases like, "You're either with us or against us, trust the plan, do your duty, or for the greater good." Each phrase carries a moral charge that bypasses critical thinking. These are what I call semantic anchors, words designed to hook the nervous system, not the intellect. Over time, the body begins to react to these anchors automatically, tightening or relaxing based on their emotional association. That's not metaphorical, it's neurochemical. Language literally sculpts physiology. Nervous system language, NSL, the antidote if MLH explains how language becomes manipulation. Nervous system language, NSL, offers the countermethod, a framework for communication that restores physiological coherence and emotional sovereignty. Where traditional linguistics studies grammar and meaning, NSL studies tone and safety. The question it asks is simple. How does the nervous system hear what words mean? In NSL, we prioritize breath, pacing, and prosody, the melody of speech that tells the body whether it is safe to listen or needs to defend. When someone is activated, no amount of explanation can help, but tone, rhythm, and calm presence can. Co-regulation, the process of syncing another person's nervous system to your steady state, becomes the bridge back to reason. You don't need to argue with someone out of fear. You need to help them feel safe enough to think again. That's the difference between confrontation and compassion, between propaganda and dialogue, between coercion and connection. From cults to culture, the same machinery brainwashing, in its essence, is cultural hypnosis. It's not limited to religion or politics. It's in marketing, entertainment, and even self-help. It's in every system that tells you what to fear, who to blame, and what to believe to be worthy of love. Modern research on conformity, like Solomon Ash's 1951 experiments, showed that even intelligent individuals will deny their own perception to match group opinion. Milgram's 1963 obedience studies revealed that ordinary people will harm others if an authority tells them it's necessary, and Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment 1971 showed how quickly role-based conditioning transforms identity. These studies are not historical curiosities, they're the foundations of social engineering. The same principles now operate algorithmically. Recommendation engines, echo chambers, and influencer hierarchies all serve as digital cultic structures. They isolate, repeat, reward compliance, and punish deviation. But unlike the old cults, they don't need walls. The confinement is cognitive. The leash is linguistic, restoring inner authority. So how do we undo the spell? Not by fighting those still under it, but by remembering what they've forgotten. Safety. When someone reacts with anger, denial, or avoidance, they're not rejecting truth. They're defending equilibrium. They've been emotionally conditioned to believe that survival depends on obedience. You cannot argue that out of them. You can only model what freedom feels like. That means speaking slowly, breathing consciously, allowing silence, and refusing to dehumanize the indoctrinated, because shame never wakes anyone up. It only deepens the trance. The real antidote to brainwashing is not persuasion, it's regulation. The restoration of emotional safety. Only when the body feels safe can the brain begin to question again. This is why in NSL tone precedes truth. You can't say you're free in the voice of control and expect it to land. The nervous system knows the difference. This special episode is not about politics, ideology, or persuasion. It's about physiology, perception, and liberation. To understand how brainwashing works, we must first understand how language enters the body, how tone becomes truth, how fear becomes loyalty, and how we can reclaim our voices as instruments of coherence rather than control. In the Inversiverse, we explored the external architecture of manipulation, how society is built to keep us asleep. In Mirror Talk, we turn inward to how the body becomes the stage where that manipulation plays out. This isn't a conspiracy, it's coherence. It's the anatomy of awakening. So today, as we begin this one-off special, I invite you to listen not just with your mind, but with your breath. Feel what happens in your chest when you hear certain words. Notice which phrases make you tighten and which make you soften. Because brainwashing doesn't live in the headlines, it lives in the heartbeat. And the only way to wake from it is to feel your way back to truth. Once we understand that indoctrination begins in the body, we can start to trace its linguistic fingerprints, to see how fear becomes phrased, how belonging becomes borrowed, and how the nervous system learns to mistake obedience for peace. In Element 1, Emotional engineering, how indoctrination enters the body, will unpack the neuropsychology of control, the emotional logic of conformity, and the first step toward reawakening, safety. Emotional engineering, how indoctrination enters the body. When people hear the word brainwashing, they often picture something dramatic, a dimly lit room, a figure shouting commands, maybe a spiral spinning on a screen. But in reality, brainwashing doesn't look like domination. It looks like comfort. It sounds like certainty. It feels like belonging. If we're to understand how manipulation enters the human system, we need to start where all programming begins. With emotion, the biology of obedience, the nervous system has only one real priority: survival. Everything else is a strategy to serve that single goal. To survive, the body constantly scans for signals of safety and threat. This process, called neuroception, operates below conscious awareness, deciding moment by moment whether to open or close, connect or defend. When the body perceives safety, it activates the ventral vagal state, calm, social, curious. But when it senses a threat, even the emotional or social kin, it shifts into sympathetic activation, fight or flight, or dorsal collapse, freeze and submit. This physiological dance is the stage upon which every ideology, religion, or propaganda campaign performs its magic. Brainwashing doesn't persuade the intellect. It conditions the nervous system. It teaches the body what to fear, and then offers safety in return for obedience. The most powerful manipulators, from cult leaders to totalitarian regimes, intuitively understand this. They don't need to win arguments. They just need to associate disobedience with danger. When safety and submission become linked, autonomy feels like a threat. That's not metaphorical, it's biological. The emotional logic of indoctrination. The human nervous system doesn't distinguish between emotional exile and physical threat. When we fear rejection, abandonment, or humiliation, the same circuits light up as when we face physical harm. This is why ostracism, whether from a family, religion, or ideology, feels like dying. Control systems exploit this beautifully. They build their foundations not on reason, but on attachment wounds. Every human is born wired for connection. It's our first survival strategy. When connection is conditional, I'll love you if you obey, you belong as long as you believe, the brain learns to trade freedom for safety. This trade becomes the emotional contract of indoctrination. You'll recognize it in every manipulative structure: a charismatic authority who redefines love as loyalty, a shared fear of outsiders, a promise that safety lives only inside the circle, and beneath it all, an unspoken rule: questioning is betrayal. Repetition as regulation indoctrination doesn't just teach ideas, it teaches rhythms. Language repetition, mantras, slogans, chants, prayers, pledges becomes a form of nervous system regulation. When words are repeated in synchrony, the brain releases oxytocin and dopamine, chemicals that promote bonding and reward compliance. This is why shared rituals feel comforting, even holy. They're not just symbolic, they're neurochemical. Robert Lifton, in his seminal work Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, called this milieu control, the engineering of an environment where every word reinforces the same worldview. In cults, this might sound like scripture. In politics, like slogans. In media, like headlines that rhyme. The nervous system learns to trust repetition more than truth. It feels safer because it's familiar. That's how propaganda bypasses intellect. It doesn't argue, it soothes. Emotional imprinting. Somatic memory as programming. To grasp how deep this goes, imagine emotional states as engrams, imprints stored not just in the brain, but throughout the body. Each intense experience leaves a residue: muscle tension, breath pattern, heartbeat rhythm, that becomes a kind of emotional reflex. When fear, shame, or guilt are paired with certain beliefs, those beliefs become embodied. They're not thoughts anymore, they're felt truths. Someone who's been emotionally conditioned will therefore feel that dissent equals danger. Challenge their worldview, and you're not debating, you're triggering a survival response. This is why logical conversations with indoctrinated individuals often end in hostility or withdrawal. They're not resisting information, they're resisting annihilation. This mirrors what's known clinically as pathological demand avoidance, PDA, a trauma-based reaction where any perceived demand triggers panic and defiance. In social indoctrination, the demand isn't an instruction, it's reality itself. To question their belief feels like being forced off a cliff. That's how deep the body remembers. Cults as nervous system ecosystems. When viewed through the lens of neuroscience, cults are not belief systems, they're regulation systems. They provide predictable rhythms, ritual, prayer, repetition, clear hierarchies, reducing uncertainty, emotional belonging, oxytocin reward, moral simplicity, reducing cognitive load. Each of these elements stabilizes the nervous system until the cost of that stability becomes dependence. Studies by Margaret Singer and Robert J. Lifton reveal the same pattern at all coercive environments: military indoctrination, corporate culture, religious fundamentalism, and political radicalization. Each uses isolation, confession, and emotional surveillance to create a sense of shared vulnerability, then redirects that vulnerability toward obedience. The result is not fanaticism, but emotional regulation through conformity. It feels good to believe what everyone else believes. It's easier to relax when you're right, and it's safer to belong than to be free. The polyvagal pattern of control. Let's zoom deeper into the nervous system. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory explains that our vagus nerve, a central regulator connecting brain, heart, and gut, mediates between three core states. 1. Ventral vagal, social safety, curiosity, trust. 2. Sympathetic, fight or flight. 3. Dorsal vagal, freeze, collapse, or submission. Indoctrination manipulates these states in cycles. First, fear, sympathetic activation, is induced through threat, uncertainty, or loss. Then, conditional relief, ventral engagement, is offered through belonging, ideology, or authority. Over time, the individual's nervous system becomes dependent on external permission to feel safe. That's the biology of addiction, not to substances, but to certainty. This explains why even intelligent, educated people can become zealots. They're not irrational, they're dysregulated. Their body has outsourced emotional safety to an external authority. How emotional manipulation bypasses logic. When the amygdala senses threat, it floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, the same chemicals that prime us to fight or flee. But these hormones also inhibit activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for logic, reasoning, and moral discernment. In other words, under stress, the brain literally loses access to the part of itself that could challenge the narrative. This is why fear-based propaganda works so effectively. When people are chronically triggered through crisis headlines, moral outrage, or existential threats, their ability to think critically is neurologically compromised. At that point, facts don't matter. Only safety cues do. The voice that sounds calm becomes the voice that feels true. That's the hidden alchemy of emotional engineering. Regulate, and they'll trust you. Dysregulate, and they'll obey you. Mirror linguistic entrapment. In the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, I describe how communication operates as an energetic exchange. Every spoken phrase is a mirror. It reflects the emotional state of both sender and receiver. When a manipulative speaker uses emotionally charged language, fear, guilt, outrage, their nervous system rhythmically entrains the listeners. This phenomenon, observed in mirror neuron research, explains how emotional contagion spreads without conscious awareness. Think of a charismatic leader whose anger feels righteous, or a movement whose certainty feels comforting. Their tone becomes your tone. Their rhythm becomes your rhythm. And soon, their reality becomes your own. Language isn't just heard, it's absorbed. It enters the body as vibration before it's processed as meaning. When a culture speaks in panic long enough, panic becomes its mother tongue. The comfort of control indoctrination often hides behind care. The parent who says, it's for your own good. The leader who says, we're protecting you. The corporation that says, we're keeping you safe. The emotional payload is the same. Safety is conditional. This triggers the oldest human imprint, infant dependency. In infancy, we survive by aligning with the caregiver's emotional state. If the caregiver is anxious, the baby becomes hypervigilant. If the caregiver is calm, the baby's heart synchronizes to that rhythm. Cults and control systems replicate this dynamic at scale. They position authority as the parent and the population as the child. They infantilize through dependency, then regulate through approval. That's not immaturity, it's biology repurposed. It's the manipulation of attachment, the silent collapse from autonomy to apathy. When a person remains in prolonged emotional subordination, the nervous system eventually fatigues. Fight or flight give way to freeze, the dorsal vagal collapse. Here, people stop arguing, stop feeling, stop questioning. They call it peace, but it's numbness. They call it faith, but it's fatigue. This is the final phase of indoctrination, not fanaticism, but apathy. Apathy is the nervous system's surrender to chronic threat. It's not agreement, it's exhaustion. In this state, the body interprets obedience as the safest form of rest. It's no longer about belief. It's about energy conservation, case reflection, the social nervous system. We often think of society as a collection of individuals, but in NSL terms, it functions more like a single nervous system, with its own rhythms of activation and collapse. When mass fear spreads, through pandemics, wars, or crises, the collective amygdala lights up. People mirror one another's dysregulation. Social media amplifies this contagion by rewarding outrage and punishment, further entraining the group to sympathetic activation. In this climate, the few who remain calm are misperceived as dangerous, not because of what they say, but because of what they don't feel. Regulation becomes rebellion. That's why awakening feels lonely. You've exited the emotional consensus. You're no longer speaking in the same physiological language. Reclaiming emotional sovereignty. To begin reversing indoctrination, you don't need to convert anyone, not even yourself. You simply need to reclaim your emotional sovereignty. That starts by recognizing when your body is being hijacked. When your heart rate spikes while reading the news. When your stomach tightens at dissent. when your breath shortens at the thought of being wrong. Those sensations are the true battleground of manipulation. The moment you feel them and breathe consciously, you've broken the loop. Regulation isn't withdrawal, it's re-entry into reality. Once the body is safe, the mind reopens to nuance. That's when truth can finally land. Reflection. The question beneath the fear. So ask yourself, when did fear first feel like loyalty? When did belonging start to require silence? When did questioning become betrayal? Because indoctrination doesn't erase individuality, it just teaches you to police it. The real programming isn't belief, it's avoidance. Avoiding conflict, avoiding doubt, avoiding responsibility for one's perception. Undoing the spell means feeling again. It means tolerating discomfort long enough to remember your own rhythm. It means learning to distinguish between what feels safe and what is true. Once we recognize that emotional manipulation precedes intellectual persuasion, we can trace the pattern outward, from the body to the collective, from the personal to the political. In Element 2, the cult template, from the personal to the political, we'll explore how these same nervous system dynamics scale into entire societies. We'll examine Lifton's 8 criteria of thought reform, the parallels between familial conditioning and ideological control, and how language itself becomes the cage we forget we're inside. Because once you understand the machinery, you stop mistaking the noise for the message. You begin to hear the frequency of freedom again. The cult template, from the personal to the political. When most people hear the word cult, they picture cloaked figures, hidden compounds, and chants under candlelight. They imagine distance, an outlier, a strange fringe. But the real architecture of control is far more familiar. It looks like the family dinner table, the school assembly, and the news broadcast. It sounds like the voice that says, be good, don't question, stay safe. Cults are not aberrations. They are replications, emotional blueprints of control that appear whenever belonging becomes more important than truth. They do not need gods or gurus. They need only nervous systems too exhausted to discern safety from submission. When you look closely, you'll see that every form of manipulation, whether in relationships, politics, religion, or marketing, operates on the same nervous system circuitry: fear, dependency, and reward. The language changes, but the tone remains the same. The nervous system of control, at its core, brainwashing is not cognitive, it's somatic. It doesn't start with belief, it starts with the body. A cult, like any controlling environment, begins by dysregulating your nervous system. It alternates between threat and comfort until your body associates obedience with safety. This is why, under control, you can feel loyal to something you intellectually doubt. The most dangerous manipulator doesn't demand your mind. They synchronize with your physiology. Through nervous system language, NSL, we can see how control is established not by words alone, but by tone, pacing, and rhythm. A slow, steady cadence can lull the body into compliance. An urgent, repetitive rhythm keeps it in survival. Both bypass logic and go straight to the vagus nerve, the body's safety switch. In mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH terms, this is emotional resonance as recruitment. The nervous system mirrors the tone of the environment. Eventually, the echo becomes identity. You stop noticing that the thoughts you have are not entirely your own. They were implanted through emotional synchrony. The family as the first cult before the political. There is the personal. Every ideology begins in the home. The family is the original nervous system classroom, where we first learn whether safety is internal or conditional. If safety is conditional, we adapt by internalizing rules of belonging. Don't upset them. Don't speak too loudly. Don't be too different. These are not just behavioral codes, they are physiological contracts. A child's heart rate, breath, and muscle tone shift to maintain harmony. That's the first act of indoctrination. This isn't always malicious. Often it's generational. The parent, too, was conditioned to equate compliance with care. But over time, a pattern emerges, the suppression of individuality in exchange for approval. By the time we enter society, we're fluent in the grammar of obedience. We know how to perform safety by silencing truth. The cult doesn't have to recruit us. We arrive pre-trained. Lifton's 8 mechanisms of control psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, in his study of ideological coercion, described 8 principles that define thought reform. When translated through NSL and MLH, each becomes less about ideology and more about nervous system architecture, a structure of compliance that can manifest in any group, family, or nation. 1. Milieu control, restricting information and sensory input to narrow perception. In digital culture, this means curated algorithms. The nervous system habituates to predictable tone, mistaking sameness for safety. Over time, novelty itself feels threatening. 2. Mystical manipulation, engineering experiences that seem spontaneous but are orchestrated. Rallies, viral outrage, emotional reveals. These events trigger dopamine and adrenaline surges that fuse emotional arousal with ideological meaning. What feels profound is often just well-timed physiology. 3. Demand for purity, dividing the world into good and evil, believer and heretic. Binary morality simplifies chaos but collapses complexity. The nervous system, already overwhelmed, finds relief in absolutes. Nuance becomes danger, certainty becomes sedative. 4. Confession culture, normalizing self-exposure to maintain conformity. In NSL, this is the fawn reflex moralized. If I admit everything, I'll be safe. It masquerades as vulnerability, but is actually self-surveillance. 5. Sacred science, presenting doctrine as unquestionable. Emotional certainty feels like truth when the body is dysregulated. The brain equates relief with validity. 6. Loaded language, reducing life to slogans. Each repeated phrase becomes a semantic anchor, a word-body pairing that triggers emotion faster than logic. Stay safe. Trust the science. For your own good. The words are not lies, but their tone is the leash. 7. Doctrine over person dismissing lived experience when it contradicts belief. This disconnects people from interoception, their inner sense of knowing. Once the body's signals are invalidated, external authority becomes the only compass. 8. Dispensing of existence defining who deserves inclusion or exile. In cults, this means shunning. In society, it looks like cancellation. The same nervous terror drives both, the primal fear of social death. These mechanisms do not need a temple or a tyrant. They only need repetition until control becomes culture, and culture becomes reality. From the personal to the political, the cult expands through mirroring, the repetition of emotional syntax across scales. The family tone becomes the national tone. The parental, because I said so, becomes the political for your safety. The rhythm of obedience becomes a global heartbeat. Sociologist Erich Fromm called this escape from freedom, the phenomenon where overwhelmed individuals prefer predictability over autonomy. When freedom feels unsafe, control feels compassionate. And so the citizen, like the child, learns to equate surrender with stability. Mass indoctrination doesn't require deception, only exhaustion. 24-hour news cycles, outrage algorithms, and performative politics all serve the same nervous system outcome, dysregulation disguised as engagement. You feel informed, but your body is trapped in vigilance. You scroll to feel in control, but each scroll deepens the trance. Propaganda as nervous system theater propaganda doesn't persuade, it paces. It synchronizes emotional rhythms, merging millions of nervous systems into one shared pulse of anxiety. A population in sympathetic activation, fight, flight, or freeze, will mistake urgency for importance and volume for truth. That's the point. NSL teaches us that tone precedes meaning. The body responds to energy before content. So when language is weaponized to maintain arousal through fear, guilt, or outrage, it bypasses critical thought entirely. You can't reason with a brain that believes it's in danger. Discernment lives in the prefrontal cortex, the part that shuts down when the amygdala is flooded. That's not stupidity, it's survival. Why the facts don't land. This is why rational argument fails against indoctrination. Facts appeal to logic, but brainwashing operates through effect. The mind under siege does not want truth, it wants relief. This is also why attempting to wake someone up through confrontation rarely works. When you challenge their beliefs, you threaten their regulatory system. Their nervous system perceives you not as a conversation, but as danger. It's not ignorance, it's physiology. So the antidote isn't louder debate, it's calmer dialogue. Co-regulation, not confrontation, reopens the gates of reason. When tone conveys safety, the prefrontal cortex re-engages. Only then can critical thinking return. This is the essence of NSL counter-control, using calm tone and measured pacing as tools of dehypnosis. The mirror linguistic dimension, from the MLH perspective, indoctrination is a semantic infection. Repetition creates resonance, and resonance becomes reality. Every slogan, chant, or viral meme functions as a mirror signal. The group amplifies itself through echo, and the echo replaces perception. In digital space, this becomes the feedback loop of social proof, the everyone's saying it phenomenon. Mirror neurons fire not for truth, but for synchrony. The more aligned the tone, the safer the tribe feels. But safety built on sameness breeds fragility, not resilience. In that sense, cults are not about belief, they're about biological belonging. They exist wherever humans trade inner coherence for outer approval. The deeper mechanism, fatigue. The deeper you trace the architecture of control, the clearer it becomes. Indoctrination is not sustained by force, but by fatigue. People don't stop questioning because they're convinced. They stop because they're tired. The cult, whether familial or political, thrives not through constant coercion, but through psychological pacing, the steady erosion of discernment by emotional exhaustion. Every broadcast, every narrative loop, every binary framing serves one function: to overload the nervous system until thinking feels unsafe. When confusion and fear cycle long enough, the body begins to crave certainty the way a dehydrated person craves water. It stops asking, is this true, and starts asking, can I rest here? That's the genius of emotional propaganda. It masquerades as relief. The regulated nervous system can tolerate contradiction, nuance, and paradox. But the dysregulated system cannot. It must simplify or collapse. That's why modern control doesn't silence speech. It scrambles attention. It floods the senses until the brain, desperate for coherence, latches onto whatever tone feels most stable. The cult template, then, isn't just a hierarchy, it's a rhythmic takeover of perception. It exploits the body's need for safety to hijack the brain's capacity for discernment. This is the next evolution of control, not physical imprisonment, but cognitive capture. If element 2 revealed the architecture of control, element 3 takes us inside the mechanism, into the nervous system's theatre of illusion, where logic, language, and fear converge. We'll explore how the brain's logic centers are hijacked through stress, how the amygdala hijack, vagal collapse, and chronic cognitive dissonance keep the population compliant, confused, and convinced. Because the modern battle for truth isn't fought with weapons or even words. It's fought through the modulation of fear. Only through regulation can truth become audible. Only through presence can discernment return. Cognitive capture. The war on discernment. If indoctrination is the architecture, then cognitive capture is the interior design, the shaping of how reality feels, not just how it looks. It's what happens when the nervous system's survival programming hijacks the mind's reasoning centers. You still think, but not freely. You still question, but only within the boundaries the system has already set. The brilliance of modern brainwashing is that it doesn't silence your logic, it redirects it. It hands your critical thinking a new script and convinces you it was yours all along. The hijack of logic, every time the body detects danger, the amygdala lights up like a flare. It floods the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline, priming the organism for fight, flight, or freeze. In that state, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's seat of logic, empathy, and long-term planning, goes dim. In neuroscience, this is called amygdala hijack. Daniel Goleman. It's not metaphorical, it's measurable. Blood flow literally shifts away from the thinking brain to the survival brain. Logic becomes luxury. For those caught in systemic manipulation, this process isn't an event, it's a state. The nervous system never fully returns to baseline. Chronic vigilance becomes normal. Once the prefrontal cortex is chronically underactivated, cognitive flexibility collapses. This is how propaganda sustains itself, by keeping the public in a mild perpetual state of sympathetic arousal, anxious, uncertain, morally inflamed. In that state, people crave closure more than truth. They reach for narratives that promise coherence, even if those narratives are false. As neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett notes, the brain predicts, not perceives. Once threat prediction dominates perception, we see not what's true, but what feels safer to believe. Cognitive dissonance, the emotional firewall. When reality contradicts belief, the body feels it first. That discomfort is cognitive dissonance, a psychological alarm that says, something doesn't match. In healthy minds, dissonance invites curiosity. Maybe I was wrong. In captured minds, it triggers defense. I can't be wrong, that would mean I'm unsafe. The difference is in nervous system regulation. A regulated person can tolerate the discomfort of being wrong. A dysregulated person cannot. Their body treats contradiction as a threat. Leon Festinger, who coined the term cognitive dissonance, observed this in his 1956 study of a failed apocalyptic cult. When the predicted end of the world never came, the believers didn't abandon the cult. They deepened their faith. The new narrative? Our devotion saved the world. The belief didn't survive because it was logical. It survived because it preserved belonging. In NSL terms, this is the collapse of coherence. The nervous system prioritizes connection over correction. And in MLH terms, it's the linguistic rewrite of contradiction, where language bends to protect emotion. So when you tell someone, the evidence disproves your belief, what they hear is, you're unsafe here. The conversation ends not in enlightenment, but escalation. Cognitive overload as control modern media ecosystems weaponize dissonance fatigue. Every headline, outrage, and contradiction creates microdoses of stress. Over time, this erodes the brain's capacity to distinguish real from performative threat. A 2022 Yale study on misinformation showed that exposure to emotionally charged falsehoods depletes cognitive resources faster than exposure to neutral information. The more anxious participants felt, the less able they were to assess truth. That's not just psychology, it's neurology. The vagus nerve, which regulates emotional stability, is overwhelmed by chronic alertness. When it collapses, the system shifts into dorsal vagal shutdown, numbness, apathy, or blind compliance. This is why the phrase, people don't care anymore, is the true victory of propaganda. Indifference is not the opposite of control. That's its final stage. NLP and the misuse of linguistic framing. One of the most overlooked weapons in psychological manipulation is the co-option of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, principles not to heal but to hear. NLP was originally developed as a model for communication and behavioral change, Bandler and Grinder, 1970s. It maps how language and physiology intertwine. But what happens when those tools are used not for awareness, but for persuasion? Advertisers, propagandists, and even political strategists learned that tone and pacing can modulate physiological states. Anchoring, The NLP term for pairing emotion with a word or symbol is now standard practice in branding and political rhetoric. Every time a politician says together while gesturing with an open palm, or a brand flashes a logo after an emotional cue, they are literally conditioning the body to associate that word or image with safety or belonging. This is linguistic Pavlovian training, and it works because the nervous system processes tone before meaning. The ethical use of NLP aligns with NSL, awareness of tone to create safety and coherence. The unethical use aligns with indoctrination, tone manipulation to create dependency and control. The difference lies in consent. One restores agency, the other replaces it. The addiction to certainty cognitive capture thrives on a hidden addiction, certainty. The anxious brain mistakes predictability for peace. When uncertainty rises, the amygdala searches for anchors. The system doesn't care whether the anchor is accurate, only that it's stable. Cult psychology exploits this with rhythmic language. Consider how slogans like "Trust the plan," "Stay home to protect granny," and "Trust the science" all share a hypnotic cadence, short, binary, and emotionally resolving. Each repetition lowers anxiety for a moment, then reinforces the dependency. The nervous system learns certainty equals safety. But safety gained through repetition isn't regulation, it's sedation. As the philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti warned, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. To the dysregulated mind, the sick society feels like home. Its rhythm matches the inner chaos. Mirror linguistic hijack. When echo replaces understanding, the MLH lens shows how cognitive capture turns communication into choreography. Speech becomes mimicry, a performance of safety through sameness. When you say what others say, your tone synchronizes, your belonging is confirmed, and your individuality dissolves. This is why in groupthink cultures, language becomes less about expressing meaning and more about maintaining rhythm. People don't speak to connect, they speak to avoid dissonance. Online, this manifests as meme mimicry. Each repost is a neurological handshake, I belong. But belonging bought through echo always costs discernment. The mirror starts to reflect not the truth, but the trend. At this stage, propaganda doesn't even need to persuade, it only needs to provide a familiar rhythm. NSL as counter-control. If cognitive capture relies on tone to dysregulate, then tone can also liberate. NSL teaches that regulation begins not with the message, but with how it's delivered. When you slow your speech, soften your tone, and lengthen your exhale before you speak, you activate the ventral vagal system, the branch of the parasympathetic network that governs safety and social engagement. In this state, communication becomes bidirectional regulation. Your calm tone co-regulates the listener, allowing their prefrontal cortex to come online. This is why true conversation feels different from debate. It's literally a nervous system exchange, not just a mental one. The best antidote to manipulation, then, isn't argument. It's coherence. By maintaining internal calm, you stop feeding the collective arousal loop. You model nervous system sovereignty. This is linguistic de-escalation, using NSL not to dominate the conversation, but to anchor it in presence. The physiology of discernment is not just intellectual. It's interoceptive. It begins in the body's ability to detect subtle shifts, heart rate, breath depth, and gut feeling. When these sensations are ignored, logic operates without context. The insular cortex, responsible for interoceptive awareness, communicates directly with both the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. In other words, how clearly you feel determines how clearly you think. Indoctrination thrives on this disconnect. It trains people to mistrust bodily signals. You're overreacting, you're paranoid until emotional intuition collapses. Once disconnected from their own sensory data, individuals outsource discernment to authority. To reverse cognitive capture, you must rebuild this interoceptive bridge, the dialogue between body sensation and conscious awareness. Ask yourself, what happens to my breath when someone disagrees with me? If it shortens, you've left curiosity and entered defense. That's not failure, it's feedback. Every contraction is an invitation to return to presence. The illusion of the rational debate in a captured culture, debate is theatre. It gives the illusion of discourse while keeping everyone within the same emotional frequency. Outrage. The system doesn't care which side you're on, as long as your heart rate stays high. Polarization is not a flaw in the design, it is the design. It ensures that logic remains secondary to identity. When both sides scream "wake up," the nervous system hears only danger, not depth. This is how control sustains itself even among the awakened through mirrored hostility. Freedom of thought is impossible without freedom of tone. Cognitive capture in relationships. The same dynamics play out interpersonally. Whenever one partner dominates through fear, guilt, or constant emotional testing, they create a microcosm of control. The other learns to suppress perception to maintain peace. This is relational indoctrination, the family cult reborn. You don't need a government or media to condition you. Another person's dysregulation can do it perfectly well. When you begin to recover from this, the first sign isn't rebellion, tease confusion. You realize how many of your truths were actually survival phrases. You start hearing the tone beneath your own thoughts and noticing where it echoes someone else's. That's the beginning of deprogramming. The war on discernment, make no mistake, discernment is under siege. Not because people are incapable of thinking, but because they're exhausted from feeling. A culture that never stops stimulating you ensures you'll never stop seeking sedation. The algorithm sells you anxiety, then sells you relief. It keeps your nervous system oscillating between fight and numb, never reaching neutrality long enough to perceive clearly. In that environment, discernment feels like effort, and effort feels like pain. But clarity isn't a luxury, it's a biological right. When your nervous system is calm, logic returns like light through fog. You don't need to be taught what's true, you can feel it. That's the paradox. Truth doesn't need defending, it needs space. As we move forward, the question shifts from how we're captured to what happens next. If cognitive capture hijacks thought, what does it do to memory, to the way we build our shared reality? In the next element, we'll trace the neural and narrative loops that turn repetition into belief, myth into truth, and emotional contagion into collective hypnosis. Because indoctrination doesn't end with persuasion, it ends with perception itself being rewritten. Only through regulation can truth become audible. Only through curiosity can reality become our own again. Integration practice. Deprogramming the body mind as the first interface, before the algorithm, before the classroom, before the creed, there was the body. Every form of conditioning begins there. The body learns first, the mind rationalizes later. When you watch indoctrination with this lens, it stops being mysterious and becomes mechanical. The nervous system is the operating system of belief. Whoever regulates it rules perception. In trauma studies, this is known as state-dependent learning. What the body experiences while under threat becomes encoded as the context for future understanding. If fear accompanies the lesson becomes truth. So when we speak of deprogramming, we're not trying to change ideas. We're changing the physiological conditions under which ideas are processed. No amount of debate can outthink a body still living inside someone else's rhythm. To reclaim cognitive and emotional sovereignty, the first act isn't intellectual rebellion, it's nervous system reclamation. From coercion to coherence indoctrination, and healing both work through repetition. The difference lies in intent and tone. Control seeks synchrony without consent. Healing seeks coherence with awareness. In NSL, coherence is the state in which tone, breath, and thought align. When you speak from coherence, your physiology reflects safety. When you speak from fear, your tone contracts, your vocabulary narrows, and your words lose semantic integrity, meaning no longer matches experience. To deprogram the body-mind is to restore semantic integrity, to make what you say, what you feel, and what you mean belong to each other again. This alignment is not poetic, it's neurological. The vagus nerve connects voice, breath, and heart rhythm. When your tone and breath slow, the heart rate follows, and the brain receives the signal. I'm safe enough to perceive clearly. That's why indoctrinated people sound the same, tight, defensive, reactive. And that's why truly liberated voices sound calm even when passionate. Their nervous system no longer needs to defend its truth. Deprogramming doesn't demand silence, it demands sincerity. The physiology of conditioning. To understand the body-mind's capture, we must look at how conditioning embeds itself biologically. Neural pathways. Repeated emotional experiences strengthen specific circuits. Each time fear accompanies obedience, neurons fire together and wire together. Hormonal reinforcement. Stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, and bonding hormones, oxytocin, intertwine during collective rituals, rallies, religious services, or digital outrage cycles, producing chemical attachment to ideology. Mirror neuron synchrony. Group emotion literally synchronizes breathing, heart rate, and facial expression. The body learns that safety equals conformity. Epigenetic markers. Chronic stress alters gene expression, turning survival responses into heritable traits. Generations inherit the imprint of collective fear. The result? A species that mistakes stimulation for connection and obedience for belonging. Deprogramming means reversing this trajectory, returning the body to its original rhythm before fear rewrote it. Practice 1. The mirror of breath. Every form of control begins by hijacking breath. Shallow breathing maintains sympathetic arousal. It keeps the brain from accessing full-range perception. So the first step in deprogramming isn't insight, it's respiratory sovereignty. Practice. Sit upright, feet grounded. Inhale through the nose for 4 counts. Exhale through the mouth for 6. As you exhale, let your shoulders drop as if the breath itself were erasing tension. Whisper, I am here. That phrase isn't affirmation, it's reorientation. It tells the nervous system, I exist beyond their script. This is not meditation in the conventional sense. It's neurological editing, updating the body's script of safety. Each exhale tells the vagus nerve that the threat has passed. Each repetition reclaims a fragment of presence once outsourced to authority. Over time, you begin to notice something subtle. Thoughts slow, clarity returns, and emotional noise quiets. What was once outrage becomes information. That's not apathy, that's freedom. Practice 2, co-regulation and mirror safety. No one heals from indoctrination alone. Isolation was the tool of control. Connection is the tool of repair. Co-regulation, the process of synchronizing with a calm nervous system, is the biological antidote to fear-based programming. Find one person whose presence feels steady. Speak slowly, without an agenda. Let tone, not words, carry safety. Notice how your breath unconsciously mirrors theirs. This is mirror neuron empathy repurposed for liberation. You are literally reteaching your nervous system that connection can exist without coercion. Even a pet, a tree, or a rhythmic sound can serve as a co-regulation anchor if human safety isn't accessible. In NSL, this is called restorative resonance, rebuilding relational safety through tone rather than ideology. Practice 3, the Socratic reawakening. Once regulation begins to stabilize, cognition can safely resume its rightful place. This is where Socratic questioning becomes the scalpel of discernment. It's not an argument, it's curiosity disciplined by logic. When confronted with a strong claim, whether political, religious, or relational, ask 4 sequential questions. 1. What emotion does this idea evoke in me? 2. Who benefits if I believe this? 3. Does this belief expand or constrict my body? 4. What happens to my breath as I hold it? The first reveals somatic programming. The second exposes manipulation. The third measures truth through physiology. The fourth invites regulation before conclusion. These questions reopen the neural pathways closed by fear. They restore what indoctrination destroyed. Delay. Discernment is simply curiosity with patience. Rebuilding semantic integrity language and the nervous system co-evolve. When one is distorted, so is the other. Consider the phrase, it's complicated. In an indoctrinated culture, this phrase signals avoidance. In a liberated one, it signals depth. The same words, different tone. The nervous system decides the meaning. To rebuild semantic integrity, you must reclaim tone ownership. When tone aligns with truth, meaning self-corrects. Example, instead of saying, I'm fine with a clenched jaw, say nothing until your breath expands. Then try again, I'm not fine yet, but I'm present. The content barely changes, but the signal transforms from suppression to coherence. MLH frames this as linguistic resonance repair, restoring language to its sensory origin. When words once again match felt truth, indoctrination loses its leverage. Practice 4. The breath of inquiry combines Socratic curiosity with NSL pacing. Inhale, what am I feeling? Exhale, what's the evidence? Inhale, what's mine? Exhale, what's theirs? This rhythmic dialogue teaches the body to separate self from suggestion. Each question interrupts the automatic emotional loop, the very mechanism that propaganda exploits. You are training discernment not as intellect, but as rhythmic awareness. Over time, you'll notice external manipulation faster because it won't match your internal cadence. That mismatch, what feels off, is your reclaimed intuition, trauma loops, and the rehearsal of safety. Many indoctrinated individuals live in trauma loops, repeating emotional states encoded during earlier manipulations. You might find yourself oscillating between anger, despair, and apathy, wondering why peace feels alien. That's because safety too is a learned state. You must rehearse safety the same way you were taught to rehearse fear. Each time you practice grounding, through slow exhale, open posture, or gentle tone, you are signaling the nervous system to expect peace as normal. Neuroplasticity research, Siegel-Cozzolino, shows that consistent calm states reshape neural architecture. Calm becomes habit. This is how deprogramming stabilizes. Repetition of safety replaces repetition of fear. The politics of attention is the currency of consciousness. Propaganda spends it for you. Deprogramming teaches you to spend it intentionally. When you decide where to place attention, you are rewriting the algorithm. Try this. Before opening a screen or engaging online, pause and ask, what is this moment for? If the answer is regulation, connection, learning, creation, proceed slowly. If the answer is escape, numbing, outrage, validation, breathe before continuing. That pause is micro-sovereignty, the reclaiming of agency from algorithms. Attention detox is not withdrawal, it's the recirculation of awareness back to the body. When attention anchors in sensation rather than stimulation, discernment stabilizes. Reintegration. The language of the unhypnotized to speak as a deprogrammed being is to speak from presence, not persuasion. Your voice slows, your syntax lengthens. Pauses appear between sentences. You stop trying to convince and start trying to connect. NSL calls this ventral voice communication from a regulated nervous system. It's the physiological sound of autonomy. MLH calls it semantic congruence, when meaning carries its own frequency of truth. You've probably felt this before. Someone speaks softly but with gravity, and you trust them instantly. That's the language of the unhypnotized tone so coherent, it can't be faked. This tone doesn't fight lies. It renders them irrelevant, because propaganda depends on reaction. The moment you stop reacting, the spell breaks. The mirror of self-trust. The ultimate deprogramming isn't about discovering hidden truths, it's about rediscovering self-trust. Indoctrination fractures self-trust by replacing inner reference with external authority. The voice in your head that once said, I know, becomes, they must know. To reverse that, you must become your own reference point again. Try saying aloud, I don't need permission to perceive. Notice how that feels in your body. If it creates tension, that's not doubt, that's the muscle of authority atrophied by dependence. Keep practicing until the phrase flows without effort. That flow is the felt sense of sovereignty. You'll know you're healing when your curiosity returns. Indoctrination kills curiosity because it threatens control. The deprogrammed mind asks, what else might be true? Not to escape, but to expand. That's discernment reborn as wonder, collective deprogramming. The slow awakening deprogramming doesn't happen in mass conversions or viral awakenings. It happens in micro moments, one nervous system regulating another. A parent learns to speak to their child without fear. A citizen pauses before reposting outrage. A teacher admits uncertainty. Aloud, these small acts of coherence ripple outward. They form what systems theorists call emergent synchrony, a new order born from self-regulating parts. You cannot force awakening, but you can become the frequency that makes it contagious. That is how truth spreads, not through argument, but through resonance. Reflection prompt. What truth feels like expansion, not contraction? Hold that question in your body, not your mind. When you find a truth that relaxes your breath, that's the one worth keeping. Deprogramming isn't about rejecting everything you were told. It's about feeling which beliefs your body still wants to live in. Each belief that softens you is a bridge back to coherence. From deprogramming to embodiment, the body-mind can now think and feel freely again. But liberation without embodiment remains abstract. To complete the process, the nervous system must learn how to speak from this reclaimed state. Because the voice is both a mirror and a messenger of regulation. It carries the vibration of freedom long before the mind can explain it. In the next element, we'll explore how to reclaim tone and presence as acts of sovereignty, how to speak with the unhypnotized voice. The goal is not to persuade the world, but to let the world hear coherence through you. Deprogramming is not debate, it's remembering rhythm, and every calm, coherent breath is a small rebellion against the noise, embodied resonance, speaking with the unhypnotized voice. When the nervous system heals, the voice changes first. Its cadence slows, vowels lengthen, consonants soften. You can hear coherence before you can name it. The voice as a mirror of regulation. The hypnotized voice sounds like tension, disguised as certainty, clipped syllables, shallow breath, upward inflection that seeks validation. The unhypnotized voice, by contrast, is not loud, it's present. Its power comes not from projection, but from resonance, vibration that originates in the chest rather than the jaw. This isn't a mere metaphor. The vagus nerve connects the larynx, lungs, and heart. When breath deepens, vagal tone rises, and the voice literally stabilizes frequency. That frequency regulates whoever hears it. In other words, your tone teaches safety. This is the essence of embodied resonance, using physiology as language. Each syllable becomes an act of co-regulation, a micro-ritual of liberation. From performance to presence, modern culture trains us to perform emotion rather than embody it. Marketing, politics, and even wellness spaces reward the appearance of authenticity over its felt sense. We learn to speak for effect, to convince, correct, and convert, all of which tighten the nervous system. When speech arises from tension, even truth sounds like a threat. When speech arises from calm, even confrontation feels like care. The transition from performance to presence begins with somatic honesty, noticing what your body does while you speak. Do your shoulders rise? Does your breath stop mid-sentence? Does your throat close when you say I? These are not quirks. They're physiological confessions. Each contraction reveals a belief still seeking permission to exist. To speak with the unhypnotized voice is to let your body tell the truth, even when your words are uncertain. Tone becomes the bridge between what you mean and what you believe you're allowed to mean. NSL Principle 1, ventral tone restores trust. The ventral vagal system governs social engagement, eye contact, prosody, and emotional nuance. When it's active, conversation feels mutual rather than defensive. You don't merely exchange information, you exchange regulation. In NSL, ventral tone is the physiological language of safety. It's not the words but the music that tells the listener, you're not my enemy. Practical translation. Lower your volume slightly. Lengthen exhalation before difficult statements. Let silence finish your sentence instead of justification. This rhythm signals that you're not rushing to control. In mirror neuron terms, your calm becomes contagious. A 2021 University of Parma study confirmed that vocal tone modulates the listener's autonomic state, even when the words are neutral. Tone precedes meaning. That's why indoctrination always shouts and healing always softens. NSL Principle 2, pause equals power propaganda thrives on immediacy. Every algorithm rewards speed. Every debate punishes stillness. But the nervous system requires time to evaluate safety. A pause isn't weakness, it's vagal sovereignty. When you pause before answering, you let the prefrontal cortex re-enter the conversation. Raison rejoint émotion. This single micro-habit dissolves manipulation faster than any argument, because control depends on reflex, freedom depends on reflection. Right in dialogue, someone accuses. You inhale. You wait one heartbeat longer than comfort allows. Then you exhale, and only then respond. That gap is deprogramming in real time, the space where reaction becomes response. MLH Principle 1. Reauthoring the narrative. The mirror linguistic hypothesis teaches that language doesn't just describe reality, it constructs it through resonance loops. To speak unconsciously is to replicate inherited frequency. To speak consciously is to rewrite the acoustic code of belief. Each word carries an emotional signature shaped by culture and memory. When you reclaim tone, you begin editing the collective dictionary. Take the word freedom. Spoken from tension, it sounds like a protest. Spoken from calm, it sounds like an arrival. Same semantics, opposite signal. The goal is not linguistic purity, but semantic coherence, letting words vibrate at the frequency of lived truth. You're not fighting the old language, you're retuning it. MLH Principle 2. Echo hygiene. Just as physical hygiene prevents infection, echo hygiene prevents mimetic contagion. Each time you repeat a slogan, share a phrase, or quote a narrative, you participate in resonance replication. Before speaking or posting, ask, does this sound like me or like the spell? If the tone feels rushed, sarcastic, or inflated, it probably belongs to the collective trance. Delete, breathe, rephrase. The purpose isn't silence but sovereignty, to ensure your voice originates from perception, not programming. When enough individuals practice echo hygiene, social discourse shifts from reactivity to reflection. Noise becomes signal. The somatic signature of truth. In deprogramming the body mind, we explored truth as expansion. Here we refine it. Truth has a sound low, grounded, resonant. Deception, even self-deception, carries constriction. Pitch rises, cadence quickens, the body leans forward. Somatic therapists call this vocal congruence. When voice and body mismatch, listeners feel unease even if they can't name why. This is why genuine authority feels effortless. The physiology of the speaker aligns with the message. To practice vocal congruence. 1. Speak a statement aloud. 2. Notice where in your body vibration gathers. 3. If it stays in the throat, you're performing. 4. If it resonates in the chest or belly, you're coherent. This is not mysticism, it's acoustics and anatomy. The diaphragm is the truth chamber of the body mind. Tone as transmission. Every relationship, every culture, every ideology runs on tone exchange. Tone is the emotional bandwidth of information. During mass hysteria, the collective tone spikes into sympathetic overdrive, pitch, pace, and panic. During awakening, tone descends, slower rhythm, deeper timbre, wider silence. If you want to sense a society's state of consciousness, don't analyze its words, listen to its tone. The world currently vibrates in minor key urgency without melody. Your task as a conscious communicator is to introduce harmony, not volume. You become in essence a tuning fork for sanity. The ethics of expression, freedom of speech, is meaningless without freedom from the state. When speech emerges from fear, it reproduces the energy of control. Therefore, the ethical question is no longer, what am I saying? But from where in my body am I saying it? Embodied ethics demands self-attunement before articulation. This doesn't censor passion, it purifies it. The unhypnotized voice can be fierce, but its fierceness arises from clarity, not collapse. It's the difference between a storm that destroys and rain that nourishes. In NSL practice, this is known as regulated intensity, allowing full emotional charge while maintaining rhythmic stability. The nervous system becomes a conduit, not a container. Case study, the heated dialogue. Imagine two people debating politics. Both are intelligent. Both believe they're logical. Within 30 seconds, tone tightens, pitch rises, bodies lean forward. Neither realizes their amygdalas have taken the microphone. Now introduce a third person who remains calm, slower breathing, softer eyes, voice steady. Within minutes, the room's physiology begins to synchronize with the calmest system present. Words start landing again. This isn't charisma, it's biology. Regulation is persuasive because it feels like the truth. The unhypnotized voice doesn't win arguments, it dissolves them. Embodied listening speaking consciously requires learning to listen somatically. When someone talks, feel their words in your own body. Where do they land? Throat, gut, heart, head? You're not analyzing, you're attuning. The body recognizes resonance before cognition intervenes. Embodied listening transforms dialogue into co-regulation. You stop preparing your reply and start mirroring calm. The other's nervous system senses it and unwinds. This is NSL reciprocity, communication as mutual regulation rather than contest. Practices for embodied resonance 1. The tone scan. Before speaking publicly or privately, hum softly on one note. Feel the vibration travel through the chest, throat, and skull. Where vibration stops, awareness stops. Breathe into that area until resonance flows freely. 2. The 5-second descent. At moments of stress, exhale for 5 slow seconds before replying. Imagine the sound dropping down your spine. This grounds pitch and prevents emotional escalation. 3. Mirror recitation. Choose a phrase that symbolizes integrity. I mean what I say. Speak it to your reflection. Adjust until your reflection relaxes. You've found coherence. 4. Resonant reading. Read a paragraph from any text out loud. Notice if your tone amplifies or softens the tension in the words. This reveals whether the narrative controls you or you control it. These micro-rituals train the nervous system to prioritize resonance over rhetoric. Collective resonance, the acoustic commons. When individuals begin speaking from regulation, the social field reorganizes. Conversations slow. Online arguments lose traction. The collective breath deepens. This is not idealism, it's emergent behavior. Systems theory shows that coherence at local nodes produces stability across networks. One calm nervous system online can influence thousands through tone and timing alone. Imagine digital spaces where tone was moderated, not censorship but synchrony, where comment sections rewarded coherence instead of outrage. That would be an acoustic revolution, the evolution of discourse from noise to harmony. The voice as ritual. Ancient cultures understood sound as sacred architecture. Mantra, chant, and prayer were not superstition. They were vibrational technologies for regulating collective physiology. Modern science now validates what mystics intuited. Group vocalization increases oxytocin and synchronizes heart rhythms. To reclaim this wisdom, speak not only to others but with them. Let conversation become ritual, a space where tone repairs trust. You can practice this in everyday life. Sharing meals without devices, reading aloud with friends, singing softly during stress. Each act re-enchants communication as communion. The unhypnotized voice doesn't preach, it sings the nervous system home. Shadow of the voice. When silence becomes a spell, yet even healed voices can fall into shadow. Silence, when chosen from fear, becomes complicity. When chosen from presence, it becomes potency. Indoctrination thrives on both noise and avoidance. Embodied resonance invites conscious silence, pauses that clarify rather than conceal. The distinction lies again in physiology. Fear silence contracts. Sacred silence expands. Before withholding speech, check your breath. If it's shallow, speak softly. If it's full, stay quiet. That simple check keeps expression aligned with integrity. Integration. Voice, breath, belonging. To live as the unhypnotized self is to integrate breath, tone, and belonging into one field of awareness. Belonging no longer means agreement. It means resonance without dependency. When you embody coherence, you become both mirror and medicine. People may not agree with your words, but their bodies recognize your safety. That recognition is the seed of collective healing. The body remembers tone more than argument. Your calm today becomes someone else's baseline tomorrow. This is how culture evolves, not through conquest, but through acoustic contagion of coherence. Reflection prompt. Can I stay present while others stay asleep? Let this question echo without urgency. Presence doesn't mean preaching, it means refusing to contract. Each time you hold your tone steady in the face of chaos, you anchor an alternative frequency of reality. That is the silent revolution, regulation as resistance. By now, the journey has moved from recognition to rhythm. We've traced manipulation through body, memory, language, and tone, and reclaimed each as our own instrument. What remains is remembrance, the quiet knowing of who you were before the spell. In the final element, we'll return there, to the inner voice beneath every doctrine, to the still consciousness that cannot be programmed. Because awakening isn't conquest, it's coherence remembering itself. The end of indoctrination is not victory, but vision, a world where speech once again carries soul, remembering the self before the spell. Every culture constructs its own kind of spell. Some call it civilization, others ideology, others merely normal. Whatever the name, the function is the same, to create consensus around meaning. The spell as system to live in society is to live inside shared hallucinations that give order to chaos. But the line between coherence and control is thin. When the consensus begins to dictate perception, when belief replaces observation, and when dissent is pathologized as danger, the spell has already begun. The human nervous system, designed to detect threat and seek belonging, becomes the instrument of its own manipulation. Propaganda, persuasion, and performative virtue all recruit the same biological circuitry that once kept our ancestors safe in tribes and families. Fear and love, the primal levers of attachment, are re-engineered to steer collective attention. In this context, brainwashing and indoctrination are not exotic anomalies. They are the logical extremes of social conditioning. The 20th century showed us its most violent forms: fascist rallies, Maoist re-education, Jim Jones' fatal communion. The 21st has refined the method: algorithms, curated feeds, influencer theology, institutional virtue signals. The mechanics have changed. The neurology has not. To understand how the modern human becomes hypnotized, we must first accept that hypnosis is not an event. It's a continuum. Every system that trades safety for submission functions as a spell, and the first step out of it is recognition, the neurobiology of enchantment. When a human being encounters overwhelming information, the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, triggers a cascade of stress hormones. Cortisol rises, heart rate quickens. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning, empathy, and critical thought, goes temporarily offline. This physiological reallocation is evolution's gift for survival. The body prioritizes speed over subtlety. But in psychological warfare, whether in cults or culture, this reflex becomes weaponized. Fear stimuli, catastrophic headlines, scapegoating narratives, moral outrage are repeated until the nervous system normalizes the stress state. The brain rewires itself to interpret adrenaline as belonging, anxiety as purpose. This is the condition neuropsychologists call amygdala hijack. The prefrontal cortex cannot perform complex reasoning while the body is in fight, flight, or fawn. Indoctrination exploits this neurobiological choke point. Once a group or ideology controls the nervous system's baseline arousal, logic becomes irrelevant. My theory of nervous system language, NSL, provides a translation framework for this process. It suggests that communication is not merely semantic, it is somatic. Tone, pacing, and breath act as biological syntax. When these cues are manipulated through shouting, fear, repetition, or reward, the listener's body interprets the input as safety or threat long before cognition intervenes. In this way, the body is indoctrinated first, the belief follows. Mirror systems and manufactured empathy. The mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, builds on this by explaining how meaning is co-created, not contained. Mirror neurons in the premotor cortex respond not only to actions, but to the intention behind them. When we hear speech charged with emotion, our body echoes that state. In groups, this becomes synchrony, a physiological unison that can feel euphoric, even transcendent. Cults, movements, and political ideologies exploit this synchrony through ritualized language and performance. Chanting, slogans, hashtags, and collective symbolism create rhythmic resonance. The brain's dopaminergic system rewards conformity with belonging. What feels like conviction is often coordination, a neurochemical chorus rehearsed through repetition. History offers countless demonstrations. The chants of Nuremberg, the Red Guard's songs of devotion, the televangelist's audience in call and response. Each transforms individual uncertainty into shared certainty, a soothing substitute for thought. In digital culture, the same principle persists. Viral outrage functions as a synchronous event. Each like becomes a microdopamine release, reinforcing alignment. Disagreement, however rational, threatens the group's nervous coherence, provoking rejection or ridicule. The algorithm amplifies this emotional congruence, creating what psychologists term attentional capture loops, feedback systems that reward reactivity over reflection. The mythic mechanics of control historically. Brainwashing has always cloaked itself in the language of salvation. The Nazi mythos promised purification. Mao's Red Book offered moral rebirth. Religious cults like Heaven's Gate dressed obedience in cosmic transcendence. Each system, regardless of ideology, relies on the same three ingredients. 1. Isolation of perception, controlling information flow, whether through censorship or social shaming. 2. Inversion of language, redefining words like freedom, truth, or safety to align with obedience. 3. Emotional regulation by proxy, dictating what members are allowed to feel, when and toward whom. Modern propaganda is more subtle, but the architecture is identical. The slogans are for your safety, trust the science, and protect democracy. The emotional mechanics are unchanged. Fear of exclusion, moral superiority, and pseudo-compassion masking coercion. When society moralizes fear, dissent becomes pathology. Thus, the population polices itself, no tyrant required. Memory, myth, and manufactured reality. Contemporary cognitive research reveals that memory is not a record but a reconstruction. Each recollection is influenced by emotional state, social reinforcement, and language framing. This process, known as source amnesia, allows false narratives to overwrite lived experience when repeated with authority. During mass indoctrination, repetition becomes ritual. The familiar feels true, even when evidence contradicts it. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect, repetition as validation. Combined with emotional arousal, this effect creates confabulation, the seamless blending of memory and myth. At scale, societies begin to remember together, not what happened, but what must be believed to sustain coherence. News cycles and social media amplify this process through emotional contagion. Mirror neurons respond to the outrage of others as if it were a personal threat. This is collective hypnosis, a distributed trance held together by shared fear and borrowed empathy. The MLH framework interprets this as semantic contagion, when repeated symbols bypass meaning and become identity markers. To question them feels like self-erasure. Indoctrination thus becomes an act of linguistic possession. Words own people, more than people own words. The emotional economy of indoctrination. Why does the human mind crave control, even when it hurts? Because uncertainty is metabolically expensive. Neuroscience shows that the brain prefers predictability to truth. Predictive coding theory posits that perception is shaped by expectation. We see what we believe we'll see. Indoctrination capitalizes on this by offering certainty in exchange for surrender. The promise of moral clarity quiets the chaos of ambiguity. The nervous system relaxes, temporarily mistaking submission for safety. This is why confronting the indoctrinated with facts rarely works. Facts are stressors when they threaten belonging. The correction must occur not in the cortex, but in the body. Regulation precedes reason. The co-regulated voice, calm, non-confrontational, rhythmically stable, can reopen the social engagement system, ventral vagal. This is the biological basis of what NSL calls co-regulatory communication, a tone that communicates safety, allowing prefrontal re-engagement. Only then can logic return. The antidote to emotional capture is not argument, it is attunement. The digital mirror, virtual cultures of certainty. The internet has transformed indoctrination from a local phenomenon into a planetary ecosystem. Algorithms, optimized for engagement, amplify emotional extremes. The outrage of one becomes the nervous system diet of millions. In digital tribes, loyalty is measured not by truth but by tone. To dissent is to risk exile, to conform is to survive. This is digital totalitarianism by consent, a participatory hypnosis. Each retweet, each video reaction, each echo chamber affirmation strengthens the neural network of belief. The phenomenon parallels classic cultic structures, charismatic authority, influencers, sacred texts, memes, soundbites, purity codes, cancel culture, and excommunication rituals, deplatforming. As in all cults, the illusion of autonomy conceals the choreography of control. Yet the same technology can become a tool of awakening. The difference lies in intention and awareness. When digital language is used with NSL consciousness, pacing responses, breathing before replying, using empathy as a boundary, not a blur, the medium becomes a mirror rather than a cage. The linguistic frontier. Reclaiming the word, reclaiming the self from indoctrination, requires more than disbelief. It requires reauthorship. The MLH proposes that language not only reflects consciousness, but constructs it. To speak differently is to think differently. Ideology encodes its worldview in grammar. Passive voice hides agency. Mistakes were made. Euphemism disguises violence, collateral damage, and repetition replaces reflection. Build back better. Never again, for the greater good. Deprogramming, therefore, demands semantic integrity, aligning language with lived reality. In NSL terms, this integrity is physiological. When tone, breath, and content align, the body recognizes truth as expansion, not contraction. This somatic resonance is the measure of authenticity. The practice is subtle but radical. Pause before reacting. Name sensation before narrative. Speak slowly enough for meaning to catch up with sound. This is how one reclaims the nervous system from the spell. The historical mirror. Lessons repeated history repeats not because people forget, but because trauma teaches faster than reflection. The witch hunts, inquisitions, purges, and propaganda wars of the past all share the same nervous signature. A population coerced into moral panic, convinced of its virtue while committing harm. The pattern endures because emotional contagion moves faster than conscience. The limbic system learns in milliseconds. Ethical reasoning takes seconds. Those seconds decide the difference between empathy and atrocity. Modern societies, despite their sophistication, remain vulnerable to the same neurological shortcuts. The global crises of recent years, pandemics, wars, and political polarization have shown how easily populations regress to tribal reflexes. Language of care becomes language of coercion. Safety becomes a synonym for submission. Yet awareness spreads too. The same networks that propagate panic can disseminate coherence. The new literacy is not digital, it is nervous. Deprogramming the body-mind true deprogramming does not begin with information, but with sensation. The indoctrinated mind cannot hear the truth until the body feels safe enough to risk uncertainty. NSL-based interventions focus on restoring parasympathetic tone through slow exhalation, grounding posture, and gentle pacing in dialogue. Co-regulation, two nervous systems resonating in safety, reawakens critical thought more effectively than confrontation. This aligns with findings in trauma-informed psychotherapy. Safety, not logic, restores prefrontal access. Complementary practices include Socratic inquiry, asking open-ended questions rather than asserting conclusions, inviting the cortex back online. Semantic reflection, repeating a loaded phrase in a neutral tone, for your safety and noticing bodily response. Mirror journaling, writing as if explaining one's beliefs to a compassionate outsider, observing where certainty wavers. These practices re-establish neurosemantic coherence, the alignment of meaning and physiology. Once the body believes safety, the mind becomes curious again, speaking with the unhypnotized voice. The end of indoctrination is not defiance but discernment. The unhypnotized voice is calm, precise, and empathetic, not because it avoids truth, but because it carries no threat. In NSL, this tone activates the ventral vagal pathway, inviting others into shared regulation. It is not missionary language, but mirror language. It reflects without imposing. In MLH terms, it transforms communication from projection to co-creation. To speak with this voice is to dissolve spells by existing outside their rhythm. Indoctrination thrives on urgency, polarity, and speed. Truth survives in pace, presence, and patience. The revolution, if it exists, will sound like coherence. Remembering the self before the spell. To remember the self before the spell is to recall a perception untouched by performance, a child's gaze, a beginner's mind, an awareness not yet colonized by belonging. The process is neither nostalgic nor naive. It is the slow unbinding of linguistic hypnosis, the rediscovery of inner authorship. This is the psychological act of sovereignty, to think one's own thoughts in one's own tone. The indoctrinated person seeks safety in similarity. The awakened one finds safety in sincerity. One follows rhythm, the other creates harmony. Healing from brainwashing is not merely intellectual, it is existential. It requires grieving the loss of false certainty, forgiving the parts of oneself that believed, and cultivating curiosity as a daily discipline. This is where NSL and MLH converge, one through the body, one through meaning. Together, they offer a new literacy, a linguistic nervous system that perceives language as a living organism, capable of harm or healing. The digital way out in the modern world, deprogramming must also happen online. Digital communication lacks the prosody of in-person dialogue, yet tone can still be transmitted through pacing, punctuation, and intention. Micro practices include reading comments aloud before posting to check nervous tone, using pauses, ellipses, line breaks to emulate breath, avoiding reactive urgency, delay response until the body is calm. Communities can anchor digital coherence by modeling curiosity, not conversion. The antidote to viral manipulation is the virality of reflection. In this way, technology becomes a mirror for consciousness rather than its captor. As we conclude this special episode, its lens naturally widens toward the broader ecosystem of my work. If you want to indulge more, I recommend my project, The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, as the next evolution for you to potentially explore. The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe is an exploration of how these theoretical frameworks, NSL and MLH, live inside raw human emotion, social discourse, and the uncomfortable truths that polite culture avoids. While Mirror Talk dissects communication as nervous system language, the unfiltered human inhabits it, examining envy, anger, shame, guilt, and love as mirrors of both social and biological programming. It moves from theory into confession, from observation into embodiment. Listeners ready to confront their conditioning, question emotional orthodoxy, and recover the authentic pulse beneath indoctrination will find there the next chapter of coherence, not to fight the spell, but to dissolve it. Awakening doesn't need an audience. It begins the moment your breath slows in the presence of truth. Speak quietly, but with coherence. Listen deeply, but without fear. The spell breaks not through battle, but through presence. Thank you for your time and attention today. You've been listening to the Mirror Talk special, Undoing the Spell, Language, Fear, and the Mechanics of Brainwashing. Until we meet again, I'm James Miller.